Welcome to Capes, Cowls Masks, the show that explores supes and science fiction. I'm Jake, and as with always, I've got with me Dave. How's it going, Dave?
Going good. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Finally in a proper lockdown over here.
Yeah.
So just trying to find out new ways to keep myself entertained. How about you? You been watching anything, keeping entertained somehow?
Yeah, obviously with Halloween coming up, then there's been a lot of spooky films to watch during that time. It was good to sort of go back and like Hocus Pocus. I hadn't seen that literally since I was like a child, so I really couldn't remember much of that film, even though people always talk about it. And yeah, going through, obviously The Mandalorian has started, which, we've talked about that as well, like recently, which is a lot of fun. So that gets you back into the Star Wars mood. And yeah, just like a big mix of things really. Like, so it's been fun to sort of like revisit a lot of older nostalgic stuff, and then also experience some new Halloween films. So watching like Trick or Treat, and watching films that popped up on Netflix recently. So I rewatched Borat, but I still have to watch Borat 2, which we mentioned before this, and watching films like Trial of Chicago 7 as well, which has been nice, because as you amp up to what would be awards season, then that void is still kind of being filled in some respect by Netflix and Amazon, etc.
Yeah, it's weird because we're still gearing up for awards season, but it's without the cinemas, which is so weird.
Yeah, exactly. And these films that would be go into cinema, but they which was the one which they sort of sold off to Amazon recently, and
coming to America.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like all these films is getting sold. Like, oh, do you want it?
Yeah, I believe Sony were auctioning off No Time to Die, which was really surprising to hear that. Apparently, the asking price is $600 million.
Yeah.
And immediately Apple pulled out. We're like, no thanks.
Yeah. No, thank you. I think they're just trying to see which is the best way of making money, really, isn't it? They're saying, well, rental clearly isn't working, so if streaming is the only way, how much money can we get from streaming? Here's the bottom line that we want to make. Are we more likely to make that through an offer with Netflix, or are we more likely to make that when it does open eventually? So I think that's what that comes down to. It's I didn't take it too seriously, because I don't know if you can take it that seriously as a business transaction, or whether it's just literally just them seeing, let's just see what comes of it. It's kind of like that famous story about Cleopatra, where they offered her $1 million to star in Cleopatra. The fact that she was like, no, I don't want to be in that film, and they were like, oh, you'd have to pay me $1 million to be in that film. And they were like, okay. And they was like, oh. So then she had to be in it, kind of thing. So it's like, but they never expected that they would actually say yes. So it's kind of like that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things from all these big studios that they're just trying out differently. Obviously, because of this whole COVID situation, no theaters. Like, Disney have been trying new things with Mulan, and now they're going to just drop Soul. So yeah, it's a weird time, because while we do have some really good content on TV coming out, like you said, Mandalorian, loved it. Cheeky plug, you guys can check out our show, The Mondaylorians. We'll talk a bit about that later. But that's been really fun, and yeah, like you, just catching up with some spooky movies. Rewatch Scream. That's such a classic for me. It's one of my favorites. Hocus Pocus as well, like you, because just everyone went crazy this year for Hocus Pocus for some reason, more so than other years. I don't know what it was, and I thought, all right, I'll check it out. It's on Disney Plus, remastered in 4K, and I never noticed how horny that film was. Yeah, it's just filled with all these sort of really subtle, but like if you pay attention, like extremely thirsty jokes. Like, don't know how that got past Disney.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so this week, guys, we're gonna do something a bit different. Me and Dave sort of realized there's not a lot awful news at the minute. There's no films being made for starters, so there wouldn't be much. But we thought, well, what's the climate at the minute? And of course, we got the upcoming US election. Well, I say upcoming. As we're recording, tomorrow will be result election day. So when this show premieres on Wednesday, we already know who's going to be leading the country. So this is kind of weird doing this show and talking about this before it's happened.
We'll look back on this and be like, oh, we were so happy back then, you know. Oh, those fools, you know.
So yeah, it's the US election, and we also thought we're coming up to 5th of November, famously in superhero land to be for V for Vendetta, the comic by Alan Moore, then later remade into a film with obviously heavy political themes and quite relevant in a very scary way to our times now, what with viruses and stuff like that. So we kind of had the idea, hey, let's do a superheroes and politics show, you know, talk about the history of the stuff, talk about all the different themes. And the thing is, more and more people these days are complaining about politics in comics, in movies, TV, or, you know, superhero stuff in general, entertainment. I think usually they're offended because the creators' politics don't align with their own, but sometimes they're just offended because there's politics in there at all. Now, I think, you know, inevitably someone will always complain that politics don't belong in superhero stuff, and that the creators should just keep the opinions to themselves. But let me just say this up top. It's ridiculous to say because, and I can't understate this enough, politics have always been part of superheroes and the comics that they originated from. So, I don't know, Dave, what are your sort of overall thoughts of like politics and superheroes in general? And, you know, and obviously, because I'm sure you're seeing it like I am, a lot of people complaining now about, you know, politics in comics and, that's too woke or that's too fascist or whatever side you lean on. What are your sort of overall big picture thoughts on it?
I think my thoughts are clear from the fact that I left my Star Wars themed background from when we recorded the Mandalorians on Skype. So I'm in Palpatine's office right now. So I think that tells you, Jake, that, you know, I love democracy. I love the Republic. I'm not secretly trying to form a galactic empire which will bring peace throughout the galaxy. I've always gelled with stuff that has that sort of political message and undertone. And, you know, speaking of Star Wars, you know, that is partly why, you know, I think a lot of people like complain about the prequels and stuff like that. You know, they're like, oh, it's too political, or I don't like, you know, trade negotiations and things like that. And I don't know where it comes from, but, you know, I've always enjoyed that kind of stuff. You know, I really like getting into the world building of aspects and reflecting our real world, because you can kind of, I think it comes from superheroes and Star Wars, that idea of the underdog, is that you always want to support like people who are being misrepresented or being treated unfairly and then are defended by groups or heroes or the good guys. And I think then you think, well, how does that corruption and villainy happen in the first place? And then these comics and these films and stories show you that. And I think that's what's fascinating to me. So I think too often as well, people can attribute it to, oh, you know, I'm not interested, you know, seeing the paperwork behind the scenes. You know, why do I care how somebody became mayor, or, you know, how somebody did this, or trade routes and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But to me, it's not about that. It's about how you're using that as a reflection of real day. And I think it's really fascinating. And yeah, it's just important. It's like one of the things I always love and think back to is the actor Donald Sutherland, who was in the Hunger Games franchise. You know, he said that he played President Snow, was it? And he wanted to play that role because he was really energized by the fact that it was a way of getting children and young adults involved in politics, which I think is fantastic and is a great message of those films. I think quite often people can just attribute it to the Twilight kind of like, oh, it's just a film about, like, you know, a girl who can't decide which boyfriend she prefers. It's like, no, there's quite a lot of heavy political commentary in those films. And I think that's what was good about, you know, Donald Sutherland being in that film, is that, like many celebrities, he was passionate about this, and he wanted to use it as a way to like teach others. And I think we can see that in all the creators that make this content, you know, that celebrities will often be like, yeah, this is a great platform and opportunity for me to get across my ideas, which is something that I recently researched with Charlie Chaplin. You know, so it's been happening for, you know, 100 years almost.
Yeah, I totally agree. I also think that, you know, that's how a lot of people learn about how we work socially, politically, and all that stuff. Because, you know, school, to a certain effect, it prepares you for life on an academic sense. But I don't know about you anyway, but for me, my personal school experience, they didn't really cover stuff like, you know, how to live with people, you know, how to sort of learn about different cultures and stuff like that. So I think it's incredibly important for comics, TV, movies, whatever, to have that stuff, because that's how I learned. You know, that's how I, you know, base my political stance, is through the stuff I've read and watched over the years. That's how I've learned things. It's a good way to, especially for the younger audience, to understand this stuff, because if you're just going to sort of lecture somebody about something, I don't think they're really going to take it all in. But if you sort of encapsulate a powerful political message in a form of entertainment, that's going to go down well so much more, and you'll get enjoyment, and hopefully you can get some insight into about political themes from it.
Yeah, I think like surprisingly, religion is a big part of it as well. Like I think back to my school experience, and the only time that you sort of really learn about other cultures and other ideologies and way that people think is through like RE and religious studies, which is not really the best way of doing it, because you're already kind of sending kids to sleep by teaching them about something that they're not really interested in, because I think largely like British culture is not that religious compared to other countries. And, you know, in general, Christianity doesn't have a very good reputation or view as being, you know, very good religion, whereas, you know, possibly now, thankfully, we're getting into the age in which you do have characters in comics. For example, you've got like the new Ms. Marvel. Is it like Kamala, her name is?
Kamala Khan, yeah.
So she, you know, is like the characters and the group around her, like heavily, you know, symbolic of what that culture is. Like, you know, with like, you know, Muslim religion, you know, they'll wear like, you know, the headdresses and the appropriate clothing and that kind of stuff. And it kind of goes to show that then it's not a case of being like when we were in school, being like, oh, this is how they learn, this is how they do this thing, this is how they pray. But they're a different thing. Like, you know, you're already segregating people in that way. Whereas, you know, comics just be like, yeah, her friend is, you know, like happens to be of that religion. They're not going to shove it in your face or anything. They're quite chilled about it. You know, it's that kind of mentality, isn't it? It's like, you know, the more we learn about like cultures of the world and the way the people link themselves to different beliefs and stuff like that, you actually learn like, oh, right, that's actually quite, you know, they're quite chilled about it. It's not where we think in our minds like, oh, Christianity, like American, British, where they're just like, you must be, you know, this religion, you must do this, you know, and it's very like harsh. Whereas, and that's often why you see, you know, politics and religion clash a lot in a lot of these films and comics that we're going to mention. You know, The Boys in season 1 had that massive, you know, religious festival, which they made a lot of commentary about in season 1. And then you've got, like we'll mention later, V for Vendetta, you know, a priest is involved in, you know, some of the wrongdoing. So, you know, a lot of that comes into it as well. And I think that's where hopefully schools will learn to teach about cultures in a better way.
Yeah, because, you know, for me, I studied in a Catholic school, so they were even sometimes a bit more like
so you're already
they were like and there was times where I would question it. I would be like, well, what about this or what about that? And it would be immediately sort of shunned away and be like, no, this is the way. In a sense, like, this is the way, and don't pay too much attention to that. But it was reading about characters, especially, I have to say, Superman. Superman was a big one for me growing up, when this guy's an alien, you know, and in a way he represents the best of all humanity, and how that we should all be there to help each other, no matter what the race, culture, background, or for whatever, you know. So I think we should maybe talk about, like, how we sort of, I mean, we're both quite liberal, I think, we could say. Sorry guys, if you're on the other side. I mean, I should have given a disclaimer. This show probably will get quite heavily political at times. So
but again, it's
just a disclaimer.
Yeah, it's again that audience, isn't it? Again, I don't know. We will go into it, but it just seems the people who are enjoying that content, I can't imagine them enjoying much of the content that we'll be talking about. Like I said, if you come onto a comic book podcast, say classically, X-Men, for example, but you're massively like racist, then, why would you be into the X-Men? That's, in my mind, I can't imagine non-liberals being massively into comics. That just seems weird.
I know. I mean, we'll get into that a bit later, because that is a little topic I want to bring up about non-liberals getting into this stuff and being a lot more vocal these days. But let's go back to us. I mean, so you're quite liberal. How do you think entertainment growing up sort of steer you into how you think politically and your ideology?
Yeah, it's interesting to think of. Like I said, I don't think it is just one of those moments like you have like when watching Star Wars, you're like, boom, I love this kind of thing. It's not, it's never going to be that kind of thing. I think it's just a very, very gradual thing. And I think it's like a lot of things, which is just based on people's experiences. Like, obviously, if you come from a more wealthy or richer background, then, that can have a lot to do with it. I think sports is like a classic example. I'm not going to say that, like you can't like sports if, if you're from a certain background, but classically, sometimes people who might be from like a very wealthy background, they'll play certain types of sports, and that's the kind of interest they get into. Whereas maybe people who are from like more of a working class background, well, they might not have the money for like the kit and to get involved in something like, polo or something, like quite, expensive sports. So then, they'll end up, playing video games or reading comic books, etc. So I think it's a gradual thing about like based on your experiences. If you've seen a lot of hardship, or you've seen a lot of wrongdoings, or you've seen a lot of examples which, and you just like look into certain cases and things like that. Like, I've always been somebody who questions things as well. And I've thought about this a lot recently, especially with social media, where people will dogpile on something straight away. And I think we've had like conversations kind of like this about this privately as well, in which people will go, I'm not going to like mention the specific examples here, but they'll go, oh, this person's done that, or this person said that, or this person has not done this, which means that they must have this opinion. And I'm always the person there going, well, why do we immediately think that? What made you think that? What, so I always question things. I've always been like that. I remember like my great auntie always saying that I was the type of person that I was very quiet, and then they'd be like, Dave, what do you think? And then I would just come out with this like thing like, oh, well, I think that, and they were like, oh, you were really quiet then for like half an hour, but now we realize why, because you were kind of sitting back and like absorbing the information kind of thing. And I think it's the same with them, why I've like certain content and stuff like that, because it's the same. It's like, these situations in which you see things happen, like the characters react to it, take it all in, and then they, fight back at it towards the end. So I think it's the same, like why that appeals to me. So, whenever I've been young, etc., I've always questioned things like that, even like said in school.
Like you, I can't quite pinpoint it on one thing, but the one major thing that always stood out for me growing up was when Ben Kenobi says to Luke, the truths we cling to depend vastly on our own point of view. And I've always really acknowledged that and been like, okay, I could say something to someone about something, but they could have a totally different point of view about it. And that's awesome, and that shouldn't be tarnished in any way. So I've always sort of tried to lead life in that way, by try to see things from other people's point of view, even if it's somebody I don't agree with. Looking back and saying, okay, well, why are you sort of acting this way? I'll bring up a Brexit. 4 years ago when this was all going on. A very close friend of mine voted to leave and the whole friendship group, we all voted Remain, but he voted to leave. And it was fascinating because
has he left? Has he gone?
No, he's still here. It was fascinating because he was like, okay, this is why. One of my other friends sort of went straight for him in a way, and it became quite heated debate. But I was like, okay, let me hear why you voted. And he said this, and why I may not have agreed with a lot of stuff. I think you need to listen to people and see where they're coming from, even if you don't agree with it. And I think I learned a lot of that from Kenobi, in a sense, and the messages George was seeking through in Star Wars, and then seeping into comics as well with people like Superman or Professor X, or Captain America, or those really optimistic type of characters. So yeah, that's where it sort of started for me. And then I've always said I base my moral compass on Star Wars.
Yeah, so I think for me, again, as much as Star Wars is the biggest part, of like my film childhood, like the biggest franchise, a lot of it is just, hey, lightsabers, that's fun, and all this kind of like the mythology, the lore of it. And while, again, like I said earlier, I enjoyed like the political elements of it. Again, I didn't really realize that until I was a bit, older, etc. So, but I think actually in terms of like morals and stuff like that, I think it really comes down to like Spider-Man. Definitely, I always loved that. I remember watching the behind the scenes of the Sam Raimi films when I had that DVD, and seeing Stan Lee talk about like, these superheroes. You never saw like a guy who was like an average guy who, had just an aunt and uncle and was, went to school. They were always like a rich billionaire, and I always related very much to that. So I liked that he went at that, character in that approach. And obviously, the idea of, with great power comes great responsibility. I think that like you with that, Ben Kenobi line, that's something that I always, is, even though you think of it as like just the cheesy line that, the inspirational character kind of says, you're like, it's a great line because it's so true, because you're like, no, like people have a responsibility to act, responsible when they have power, which a lot of people in the political world especially do not use.
But the end result, the true genius of the plan, was the fear. Fear became the ultimate tool of this government, and through it, our politician was ultimately appointed to the newly created position of High Chancellor. The rest, as they say, is history.
How do you feel about the climate now with politics and entertainment, specifically sci-fi superheroes? Because, if social media has done one thing, it's made the whole world a lot more political. Well, maybe not more political, because in a sense we've always been very political.
More vocal.
Everyone's been given a voice now. And you have so much more reach, whether you're a politician or a comic book artist, so your political way of thinking is going to reach masses of people now. What do you think of the current landscape now then, with all that involved? Do you think it affects content being created? Do you think that's a lot of it is at the back of people's thoughts now about maybe what they're trying to say politically or socially?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because in my mind, I've thought, especially like on the political spectrum, that, it's going to take generations for like some political movements to change, because there's so many people from that different generation. I'm not one of those who's just like, kill them all off or whatever. No, but it's just, that's how, people grew up with different things. They grew up during different times, different wars, different scenarios with jobs and money and housing and different things like that. So they're going to like play that into like, how they vote and how they see the world. And I think that it's very interesting that as a generation, like children born in like the 90s and the noughties and stuff have a very, very different viewpoint. And like you said earlier, Brexit was a classic example. There were many headlines about torn families, people who literally were like couldn't eat at the dinner table anymore because they like the family was that, polar opposite in what they, they didn't agree with like what their parents were voting for, but the children were voting complete opposite. Which I think is very interesting because, again, it goes to show how entertainment and media is like bringing up people in a good way more than, parents do in a way. I'm not saying like people are bad parents or anything. I'm just saying that like the way as previously you would like teach your children like your own morals and your own beliefs through working and different things like that. Now it would be through, you know, the content that they enjoy and the comics and the books and the films that they read, etc. So I think that that is interesting. And I think that like, for me, maybe 2 years ago, I would have said that, like, you know, that is massively what the political landscape is like, that you've got like this older generation and younger generation, and the younger generation are very liberal, and that's why they enjoy all of these stories and this content. But I don't know, within the last year or two, I say it has got a lot more muddier and a lot more muddled. I don't believe that as much as I did. I don't know if it's because maybe some people are going to a lot of extremes because of places like Twitter and stuff like that. And some people just get defensive at the end of the day. You know, I think some people cling to opinions that they don't even actually agree with. It's just because somebody's like, they might have said one thing, which is just like, say me and you were having a casual conversation. I might have said in passing, it might, you know, and then because you're online, that's there printed in words, and somebody goes, oh,
it's fact.
You know, they've said that. And I'm like, there might not be something that they even know anything about. They've just mentioned it, you know, like, oh, I don't actually know anything about that. I just mentioned it as an example, or I just said it because it came to my mind, or because it's something that they felt at that moment, but actually like a year down the line they're like, actually I don't agree with that anymore. But because somebody's then pinpointed it, because they're printed in words, they then get defensive, like, oh, this person's challenging my opinion, I'm gonna like defend that opinion because I don't like being attacked. And that happens with a lot of things these days in terms of, you know, divisive topics, you know, in terms of like whether it be gender, sexuality, political opinions, you know, social class, you know, a lot of people can then get defensive about things, and then that creates a whole different like landscape again, where again, you know, you get a lot of like witch hunting going on and stuff like that, and you get a lot of demands for censorship, which I don't really like a lot as well. And you know, we've obviously had a big political movement this past summer with like, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, which has massively changed things again, you know, in which then people start to go, well, is it right for a piece of content to be shown because it shows a dated depiction, or should you show that dated depiction as a way of teaching people, look, this is not something that's right or something that you should do anymore? You know, classic example in my mind, when I was watching The Imagineering, I think actually, on Disney Plus, you know, the Mickey Mouse hands, you know, they come from the days of like minstrel performing, like the gloves, the white gloves. But like, again, are people there boycotting Mickey Mouse, you know, get rid of Mickey Mouse, that kind of thing? It's like, well, you know, that's just the era and the generation from which that character came from. You know, that's just the world we live in. But there are people out there who would be like, no, get rid of it. You know, so as much as like I said, I'm a liberal and stuff, there's some people who go very extreme as well. So, and I think sometimes they might then lapse into like a completely different realm. So that's why I think we are in a very, very murky situation at the moment. And I think that some media and some content are making the right messages and hopefully getting people on board. But I think at the same time, there's some people who then could like turn on that and go, they're not doing it enough. They're not saying it clearly enough. They're not, you know, that person was in there and that person isn't a part of that religion or that movement, so they shouldn't even be in there in the first place. And it's like, you know, it's that I think gets really, really muddy waters, and, you know, it's a big debate.
Yeah, it's a hard one, man, because you've sort of anything now, whether you're writing a story or a review of something, even me, like I'm starting to write reviews and I'm trying to think in my head how I've got to try and think of a non-offensive way of saying things. Do you know what I mean? Because you can't be too offensive, because then, like you said, that's stuck on there for life. I think overall, though, like the landscape of the comics and the political messages that they're saying and the films, I don't think has really changed that much. I think that's always been there.
Yeah.
I think what's changed is us as humans, as a society, and social media. You know, it's so black and white now. It's so, blue and red, left and right now, that there's very few people left. I mean, I like to consider myself like a centralist in a way. I don't have extreme views of either things. You know, there's certain things that people on the left won't agree with me, and there's certain things that the people on the right probably won't agree with me. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah,
I think it's more the people that have changed, and now because, you know, X-Men have always tackled discrimination, Green Lanterns tackle discrimination, you know, Captain America, for Christ's sake. You know, he was invented to knock out Hitler. Do you know what I mean? Like he was literally propaganda at its finest, and he's become to be this really inspirational character. For me, that's where I think the landscape is now. Comics haven't really changed. Yeah, some of the material has matured, absolutely, because, you know, the audience reading it has also matured. But I don't think the political messages they're saying has changed much. I think it's us. We're just taking it sometimes way too far and, you know, scrutinizing people for something that, you know, they could change their mind. People can change their mind over time. You know, like I remember walking out of Justice League the first time I saw that. And I remember going, it was not that bad. It was kind of fun. Do you know what I mean? And then, you know, having talks with people, and then after a while coming around and being like, oh, no, this is bad. And then realizing, no, yeah, that's a bad film. Somebody once said, like, oh, but you initially said that you liked it. And I was like, well, I've changed my mind. Like, people can do that. Like, and I don't understand why it has to be so cemented in this. You know, this past couple of years, we've seen, you know, all these storage about resurfaced tweets. You know, if you want to go to the comic book world, the one most famous is the James Gunn one.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Which got him fired from Guardians. Thank God he's back now. But initially got him fired from Guardians, Disney, Marvel, out of the family sort of thing, for a tweet that he said 10 years ago and that he'd already apologized for. So
yeah,
it's I don't when we bring, like I said, politics have always been part of entertainment, but when we bring politics in like that's taking it to an extreme where, you know, like you said, the waters get very muddy.
But it's also just expecting people to be like perfect. That's the problem I think we're in at the moment, is that too many people expect somebody to just be like, everyone is pristine and everyone is perfect. And I think the James Gunn one is a perfect example, because I think while it was like quite a lot of jokes and like a bad, inappropriate jokes that he had made, I think the thing that like made sense for that situation is that he said, I was just a different person then. I have changed as a person. And like, you know, that's perfectly fine. You know, it's the same with a lot of things, you know, is if somebody's done something bad in their past, does that just instantly mean that, like, you know, look, nope, they're written off forever, you know, we can't get them involved, you know? And it's like in comics, it's like, you know, if, you know, sorry, Winter Soldier, you were a bad guy once, so you can never, ever, ever be a hero, you know? It's that kind of idea as well, you know? Obviously, I'm not saying if somebody was like, he did something really bad, but, you know, when it's something like a passing comment, something that they've said, you know, and I will say, you know, I think that there's a lot of muddy things out there, and I, you know, sometimes I will just be like, you know what, I don't know, you know, it's up to them, you know, to make that decision. If you're from that background or you're from that religion, it's up to you to say whether you're happy or not with what their decision is on that. But something I'm not a big fan of is the idea of, you know, I think with certain examples, so like I wrote before about the lack of representation for disabled actors in Hollywood or just TV and film in general. So obviously, if somebody is blind or deaf or is autistic, then it's very hard to get on board with a performance from somebody who isn't any of those things, especially with something like autism, in which people will often say things like characters like Sheldon Cooper and House have set up very negative stereotypes of those types of people. So I think in that circumstance, it's very justified to say that like one of the people I spoke to, which is a classic thing I go back to, is like, look, you won't give us any of the normal roles, at least give us the autistic roles. I think that is like a perfectly justified reason for when things like that get political, of when people are like, oh, why can't that person play this person? Why does it have to? Because it's important to get those people involved into the industry, because those walls were set up in which they couldn't get in at all. So the only way to get them into the industry is to start playing the people who are like them. The only area I don't agree with it on is things like sexuality and stuff. I don't like this idea that we've had in recent years, again, where I believe that people go too extreme, is that like they must be from that sexuality to play that character. I think that's just complete rubbish. I think, you know, like, are you saying that Neil Patrick couldn't pay Barney in How I Met Your Mother because he is a gay character playing a straight character? By no means do I think that obviously gay actors need more representation in the industry, by all means, but I don't think we should go down this route of being like, oh, this comic book character is gay, so then they must be played by a gay actor. I'm like, no, that's that person's preference if they want to make that known to the world. I think recently it was mentioned because people were talking about the idea that you're obviously going to potentially have Wiccan and Hulkling in the MCU. And I saw a lot of people saying these need to be played by gay actors. And I'm like, Young Avengers? They might not even be comfortable with their sexuality at that stage. If you're casting like a 14, 15-year-old, you shouldn't put that pressure on there to not only come out to the public at that stage of your career, but also be comfortable enough that they know they're at that sexuality. I think that is really, really bad territory in my mind. So I think that's the one example in which I'll be like, no, I am vehemently on this decision, and I think I've justified on it. But again, that's where you get a lot of this political thing of being like, oh, we should do this, do that, But again, I think it's like I said before, it's muddy waters to be sure, and a lot of people will have their very clear opinions on it, and that's why we're in the situation that we are, because a lot of people will voice that on a platform, as they are completely entitled to do so. And it means that Hollywood and films and comics are reacting to that. Sometimes they will put out a casting call, or they'll put out a character and go, oh, reel that back in, nobody liked it, So, whereas, they could potentially like announce a character who's played, by somebody of a certain religion, but the character they're playing is not of that religion, and then test the waters. No, everyone's fine with it. Okay, we can get away with it, kind of thing. So, whereas, like, I think it was Batwoman recently, wasn't it? They like put her out in the costume, and everyone was like, that looks horrendous. So then they've come out with like this updated costume, which makes it look like more appropriate for a character of that skin tone, which was like a perfect example of them reacting and testing the waters, kind of thing.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that as well, because like you with the gender swaps thing we're going through at the minute, we're also going through the race swap thing of casting, obviously, the majority of white characters into people of color, or people of color in general, whether they're black or from Asia or any other part of the world. That I've always argued with people so many times that it literally makes no difference the color of someone's skin. I think the only time it makes a difference if it's relevant to the who that character is, in a way. Like, people will always say, they'll shout at me and say, oh, well, why don't you cast Black Panther as a white guy then? I'm like, no, because that doesn't make sense narratively. Black Panther, T'Challa, his precedent is on being a black African king. That's the way it works. Bruce Wayne is a white man. His money is inherited through American history, and we know what American history has been like. Slavery and all this other type of stuff that they've gone through. So that's why I don't you can definitely make a black Batman, but I don't think you can make him Bruce Wayne. But for example, Superman, this has been quite a hot topic recently of making a black Superman. I don't see the problem. Like, he's white, he has to, like, a lot of, I will say it, racist or fascist people will say, oh, he needs to be white, he needs to be, that symbol of America, that sort. And I'm just like, yo, Superman is an alien from another planet. Like, and what a lot of people don't understand is that, it's pretty obvious, so I don't know how people don't understand it, that his story, Superman, is all about immigration. It's all about coming from another world, adapting to the world you've moved to, and, bridging the gap between both worlds. And also the fact that Superman was created by Jerry and Joel Shuster, two Jewish immigrants. Do you know what I mean? So it's... Yeah. Do you think that's why do you think, like, liberals eventually create these characters? Because you look at Stan Lee. Stan Lee's liberal inclinations aligned with the mood of the times in the 60s. That was the height of the civil rights movement. So obviously he was going to be influenced by that. And, as you mentioned, Spider-Man, he created a working class nerd, that no one really thought could be like a superhero. He created the X-Men, who, it's anti-mutant in the Marvel world, but it's prejudice. It's like a metaphor for racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia. Homophobia, especially in the Bryan Singer films, which we did a show a few weeks back and we talked about that. So yeah, why do you think it all sort of ends up being liberal people creating this? And then once you answer that, I'd like to go on to maybe the not liberal people, even now more so, that you see them attacking this stuff, but they say they're fans. I don't know, but let's go back to like the creators themselves.
Well, I think first off, I just want to cover off like the Black Superman thing, because while obviously I'm not going to like defend people who are there like, Superman can't be black kind of thing, especially if they're going at it from a racist point of view. I think using the Black Panther one is a classic example because it's a character who has always been like that. So I understand that idea of like, Superman has always been white and Batman's always been white. I think I've said before, I think you get away with with characters like they did in like the Thor films, like Heimdall, did anyone really, like, oh, Heimdall has to be white? No, it's just a side character. Does it really matter? But I will say that I think that Spider-Man has done the best job of this, is because to me, I think if you're gonna have like a black Superman, then make a character that then is linked to. I don't think that I don't like the idea that they would lose their identity almost then as a character, because whereas Black Panther is special because he is able to represent that group. The great thing about Miles Morales is that he's able to take on the mantle of Spider-Man and represent that group. It's not that he is then a black Peter Parker. It's not that like, hey, I'm Peter Parker now. And I don't think that's why it would work for Superman in that context, or work for Bruce Wayne. Like, say like, hey, I'm Bruce Wayne now. It's like, what? Like people have known this character the way they've looked for like 60, 70 years. So I think that like, yes, while you could have a black Superman or a black Batman, I don't think they should be the Superman or the Batman. I think it would be like the Green Lantern kind of thing. It'd be like Jon Stewart, and, it would be the mantle is taken on. That's where I think that it's fair enough to have it in that context. But I only come at that in the way of like, I want to have these characters have their own character. I don't think that it should be like, oh, I'm just going to take Clark Kent's character now, yay, because that, to me, that's even worse representation, is that they've not got their originality as a character. That's what's great about somebody like Miles Morales, is that they're like, I am my own person. I am able to interact with Peter Parker in a comic book if I want to. I've not just been shoehorned onto this character that everyone loves, which kind of then already delegitimizes me as a representation character. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I think to me, the importance is like going forward is like, say Batman, for example, you've got, 5 or 6 white guys who've all played Batman and stuff like that. And to me, I would be happy to like carry on that route of like, it's always the same kind of actor plays Batman because that's who the character is. Oh, who's going to play him now? It's this kind of guy who looks similar to the last one. But you've changed the ethnicity of Catwoman. You could change the ethnicity of Robin, I think, like you've changed the surrounding characters. So like you said, like the Justice League 60 years ago of like 6 white people, hopefully in, another 20 years will be like 1 white guy and like another complete diverse cast. And I think, again, that's why characters like Kamala Khan, Black Panther, Cyborg, all those kind of characters are important, because then hopefully they will be filling these roles. And even like characters like Captain Marvel, like getting more female representation in there, they will fill these roles, and then it'll just make sure that it's a more equal roster, and not be just hokey about it of being like, oh, this is like one each, so hopefully we'll have that going forward. Back to the creators thing though. Yeah, well, what were we saying? Was it like, why are the creators so liberal? Is it? Or?
Well, yeah, it sort of ties into like the opposite, the extreme right. Because nowadays, are you aware of the term Comicsgate?
Not fully, no.
No, so I put it here on my notes. So Comicsgate is a consumer-led revolt against what is clearly a left-wing dominance in the comic book industry. Right, so these are basically a group of people, sort of the same ideology, saying that there's too much woke culture in comic books and all these movies and stuff like that, which baffles me, because haven't all the creators always been sort of liberal? If we look back at Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Alan Moore, in a certain sense, he's sort of on his own weird political mind frame, hiding out in the forest somewhere. But and we have the celebrities nowadays, like with Chris Evans is, hugely popular at the minute, being Captain America himself, and also as Chris Evans being a sort of political celebrity. So, and The Rock as well now, him playing Black Adam and being a huge political icon now is, endorsing Joe Biden. So what do you make of like the creators and people involved and versus like these people who are saying, oh, it's too left wing, but hasn't it always been that way?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And the one thing I would say, and you were mentioning examples there, Stan Lee and stuff, and this might sound really like arty-farty or really dumb, but, I would go one better, and it's just, look at history, Van Gogh, all these kind of people, they're artists. Arts inherently is a very liberal thing to do, to express yourself and to like have very like liberal ideas, to like be like, I'm going to have a painting in which like, it's just slapdash all over the place because they're a creative liberal person. So I think people like that Comic Gate thing to me just sounds baffling because that's what art is all about. That's why art is so closely aligned to liberals. And again, I don't like too much the terms of right wing, left wing, all that kind of stuff. But, arts is quite often linked to left wing. And, when they're saying about, arts as being underfunded and stuff like that, that's why it's so often that people are like, oh, we need to support left wing governments and left wing politicians so that the arts can be supported. And there's a reason for that, because those kind of people know the importance of art and entertainment and how that influences culture and that kind of thing. And it goes back again, this might just come across as like the nerd being like, I don't like sports, but it does go back to that idea of like, the right wing people are there doing fox hunting and like they go to the rugby and to the football and that kind of stuff because it's a different kind of ideology. It's a very much like, here is the game, here is the team, here are these things. You don't go to like somebody who's like passionately into football is not going to go to like ballet and be like, where's the rules in this? I want this to be more structured. I want there to be like a point system and I want that person to not be like expressing them as freely, the same way as if you went to a football game, Ronaldo's not going to just start doing what he wants, but that's what art is about. That's why there's two different things. So to me, that's why comics and entertainment are just naturally liberal, because they're artists. What the hell do you expect? They're people who are used to expressing themselves and they don't like control and to be told what to do. And by nature, they then don't like the people who are trying to control them and are trying to extort and get money and that kind of stuff. They're people who have literally like lived off cans of beans for like weeks of their lives because they love what they do so much. If they were interested in like, people like Trump where like, I had a small loan of $1 million, they wouldn't have got involved in the arts in the first place, kind of thing. What artist has been there like, I had a small loan of $1 million and I got into comic book artistry.
It's like, it doesn't happen.
Why would you do that?
It doesn't happen.
No.
You do it for the passion, which is why, like you, I'm just so baffled by this Comic Gates thing, and I just don't know where it's come out of. I don't know, because for me growing up, like the entertainment I liked was always sort of considered, that's the outside of the nerdy thing. And, there was some bullying involved, but, those were the sort of times. But now it seems like it's on another level now where they are explicitly, attacking people on like social media and stuff like that just because of a different opinion. And also because they're complaining about, I don't like this because you've done X. And it's like, well, we've always done it like this. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't understand why you're complaining now. Oh, because it doesn't match my political views. Well, tough shit in a way. Like,
yeah, I think it just comes down to like I said, I used to have a manager where I worked who was like, he had a Batman mug and he had like a Batman watch and stuff. And everyone was like, oh, you like Batman? Have you seen the new Justice League? He's like, no. I just like Batman. I don't like comic book stuff. I like Batman. He just likes him as a character. He thinks he's cool because he's like butch and like, like a dark, gritty character. And this guy's kind of like, a jokester, dark kind of guy. And I think that's what it comes down to as well. Sometimes is people are just like, they're like, I just like Superman. So then they might not actually like look into the context, like you said, of like where Superman came from, the type of stories that he tells. They might not watch things like X-Men, which are a bit more like, diverse characters. They just like Superman. So then when you mess with Superman, how dare you? I like Superman. Why have you like altered Superman, because they've just looked at this one specific part of the character, latched themselves to it, and be like, yeah, I like that white hero aspect of him, and that's the only aspect of him I like, and I don't look at any other comic book media, I just like him. And I think it comes down to that as well. Is sometimes we often, as comic book fans, think that everyone who's into comic books loves all of comic books, but often it's just that they only like one or two characters. One point I did just think is that I think often it's worth remembering that these people often are just a majority, but it's like we say a lot of times before, it's just that the loudest voices are the ones you hear the most, because again, on Twitter, there's probably like 1 million people who like agree with you, but they're all just sat there at home like, I agree with you. They're not going to be the person there ranting in all caps on Twitter. Wonder who I'm talking about there. You know, like it's, you know, the people who are like the most angry, they're the ones who are vocal. And I think, again, biggest example of that is Captain Marvel. They were all, you know, what did you call them before? Man babies.
Yeah.
So, you know,
because
as many
because
man
they are,
babies
they're all, I'm sorry, but they're all 40-year-old white men.
Yeah. Exactly. But what I'm saying is that film made $1 billion. So clearly there are a lot more people who disagree with the man babies, but it's just the man babies just are more vocal and more, you know, in your face. But the statistics speak for themselves. So I think it comes down to that generational thing we said earlier. I think a lot of people do all hold these values, but it's just that unfortunately there's just that one minority small group, but just that they seem louder than they actually are.
You chose to do that. If we sign this, we surrender our right to choose. What if this panel sends us somewhere we don't think we should go? What if there's somewhere we need to go and they don't let us? We may not be perfect, but the safest hands are still our own.
Do you have any sort of specific themes that you sort of go to in comics or entertainment in general? I mean, for me, I don't know what it is, but I've been watching a lot of stuff that does focus on discrimination. I think a lot of it has to do with Black Lives Matter. I've been have been sort of watching a lot of stuff that revolves either around racism towards black people, you know, or just black-made films. It doesn't actually have to revolve around racism, but, you know, black excellence as well. So that's what I've sort of been digging into recently, and I think that's always been part of comics as well. You know, you go back to like when Danny O'Neill took over Green Lantern in the 70s, I think it was. All of a sudden, he turned Green Lantern into who was fighting all these ridiculous sci-fi space monsters to dealing with real-world issues and stuff like racism and stuff like that. And for me, one of the biggest ones recently has been Watchmen.
Yeah, I was going to say, because, you know, throughout the entire conversation, it's interesting because we're talking about should these characters of color play these certain characters, but I think the biggest example, and obviously, you know, one you would know very much about because I'm reading Watchmen in build-up to watch the series, but, you know, you've actually, like, you know, seen it, and so, you know, that's why I'm interested in is how that covers that side of
Yeah,
things.
I mean, for me, it's the perfect example because it did something which I didn't think was possible, which is not only was it a great sequel to Watchmen, the book, which I didn't think was possible, but it actually enriched the original material as well. And it also did things by having the legacy characters, or some of them anyway, and introducing new characters and people about color. And what I really appreciate Damon Lindelof, the show creator, was that he looked at what made Watchmen so successful then. And that Watchmen was focusing on the political landscape at that time in the 80s. So this was during the Cold War, you know, when the US were having this Cold War against the Soviets and there was so much unease. There was this threat of nuclear war. Obviously, it was done in an alternate reality where President Nixon got elected for a third term. God, I hope that doesn't happen for what's going. So Damon Lindelof was like, right, what's happening right now politically in our world in 2019 at the time, you know, and especially now in 2020, and it's white supremacy, it's attack on the black culture, it's, you know, especially in America. So that's sort of where I'm going towards now, and I think it's so important for people to check out this stuff because, like I said up top, most people will learn about stuff by watching entertainment or reading some form of entertainment. I think it's just so much more enriching than maybe popping open a history book. And it also harpers on back to what you said earlier about older films maybe that have outdated cultural depictions. I'm a believer that you should leave those for cultural reference, to sort of look back how we did things there and learn from our mistakes. You know, I'm not Kylo. I don't want to let the past die and kill it. I want to learn from the past to move forward. So that's sort of where I am now. And I just, especially in Hollywood, you know, with the sort of systematic racism and, you know, being sort of dominated by white males, I think we're getting into a place now where anyone from anywhere can be in anything, and that's great. I think we'll always have people who complain, push against progress, but I think if you really are a fan of this entertainment, superheroes, comics, sci-fi, it mirrors our real world, and you have to acknowledge that there's different all sorts of people around you. So yeah, that's sort of where I sort of lean with these things at the minute.
I think as well, it's, to me, some people as well, if they complain about certain representation or they're not getting enough characters, you just need to support it as well. I think that, you know, as much as we might say, well, these right extremists or these, you know, racist people are winning the argument kind of thing. It's like, but at the end of the day, if you don't show up and you don't buy the comic, then you're not really making a great argument for them to make it. So at the end of the day, Hollywood is a business, and they might not be inherently racist. They might just be, you know, they're just selling what sells well. So at the end of the day, you know, if you are, you know, gay and you don't go support a major film that has got a gay character in it, I'm not saying that you should go pay for everyone, but, you know, if it's that, you know, if you don't turn up, you're just part of the problem, because you're not you know, like, you're not saying I'm supporting this character. I'm like, you know, like showing that like people want to see this representation. So a lot of people then say like, oh, well, there's not this, you know, it's like, well, did you go buy a ticket for that film in the cinema? Did you go pick up that comic book? Did you, you know, buy the series online? Did you know, you need to support these things as well to show that we want to watch this kind of stuff. And luckily, like I said, I think that last year's box office and the years before, by having things like Black Panther be like top of the box office, showed that is the case. But I think there's still a lot more work to do. And I think the people just need to think as well about how, you know, it's not good enough for somebody to just say like, oh, well, you know, I enjoyed that film. It's like, but did you actually go see it in the cinema? Like, oh no, I watched it on Netflix a few months later. It's like, well, if you knew it was coming out, then you were of that group and you believe in that. You need to go support it to show that we want to see this content. Because at the end of the day, Hollywood is a business and they will just do what sells well.
Yeah, no, I think the bottom line as well is that you have to obviously make good content, because people show up for good content. I mean, like, I think no matter the political message, look at Black Panther. I mean, no one would have thought how much that movie would have made. I mean, hell, let's look at Joker, who was an extremely controversial film because of the political messages it was sort of invoking and stuff like that. And that turned out to earn over $1 billion, which is fascinating. But then again, who's watching that film?
Well, I think it's interesting without that example, because I think a lot of people actually go watch that film because they're like, oh yeah, Joker, it's funny, it's dark, we like the character, but they probably don't realize actually some of the messages they're being told and kind of learning from it as well. So I don't know how many people actually, you know, walked away from that going like, oh yeah, you know, down with the system kind of thing. I think, you know, like I always remember, you know, people laughing in the screen, and I was just like, this is it's kind of scary, you know. I don't think a guy bludgeoning somebody to death is funny, but, you know, that's kind of because they go there with that expectation of like, oh yeah, it's a Joker film. So I think that there is, again, like you said, you know, obviously I'm not blaming Joker for that. I think there's a bit of expectation from an audience, and I'm glad that they turned up because, like you said, it made $1 billion. But I think it shows that change in people that hopefully over time they'll be like, oh yeah, that film was trying to say that. So they might have laughed at the cinema at the time, but a year later, you know, rewatching it, they're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize actually how much about mental health this is about, you know. So, you know, it's the same thing there.
There's a lot of misinterpretation nowadays of a lot of entertainment. Do you know what I mean? And I get that film is subjective, and comics, all entertainment is subjective in some way. You're going to get a different vibe out of it. But there's some things that are just blatantly obvious, I find. Like when people were like, oh, Joker's going to turn all these, what was the word they used? Incels. Yeah. They were going to get a bunch of incels to rise up and start killing people. And I was like, well, where'd you get this information from? Like I don't understand where that that came from. And it's glorifying this and it's glorifying that. I'm like, no, you're misinterpreting the whole message behind this film, which is we as a society, if we continue the way we're continuing, socially, politically, economically, all these things, we are going to create someone like the Joker. We are going to, destroy someone like Arthur Fleck so much that will turn them completely bonkers. I mean, in a way, it happens, not to the extreme lengths that we see in the film Joker, but in a way, it does happen in modern day. We are breaking people.
Yeah, well, I think, like you said, regardless of what the election result is, when it comes to when this episode is out, but I think, the people to blame in that situation, like who's saying that, is people like the Trumps and the Nigel Farages, is that they're the people who just go up on a stage and just say a blatant lie or just say anything and just like, oh yeah, Joe Biden was, a terrorist, and everyone's like, yeah, he is a terrorist, all this kind of stuff. That's why then, thankfully, we get entertainment and comic books, which are kind of there to combat that and to say, like, no, you're talking out of your arse, because, you got something like The Boys there, which then goes, yeah, you're advocating for gun violence. We'll show a perfect example of, like, how you're advocating for gun violence and how you're influencing all these people through the perfect representation, which is a character who is literally just a secret Nazi. That's how we combat that kind of stuff. And I think that's, again, why those stories happen, because like you said earlier, things that were in response to like the Cold War and stuff then is now being used in today's circumstances to combat these Tommy Robinsons and Nigel Farages, those kind of people, etc.
I mean, hell, even I don't know if you saw, but even the Joker hates Nazis. Did you see that trending? There was like one of the recent Tom Taylor, who's writing Suicide Squad. He I can't remember exactly, I'm paraphrasing, but he had the Joker was like, he was like, I'm a sadistic homicidal maniac, but even I fucking hate Nazis.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, unless they're showing up like a Homelander or a Stormfront in which they are clearly a villain, then like I said, it's fine. But I think going back to the kind of stories and content that I'm interested in, like you were saying about, Watchmen showing like the representation side of things, I'm always really interested in the sort of like the corruption, the reflection of like secret governments and what they're up to. Again, I'm not like some sort of conspiracy theorist, but
Dave's hunched though in his basement down YouTube holes.
I just mean things like you said, when you get things like vested interests and stuff like that. That's why, I enjoy V for Vendetta, Captain America, the Winter Soldier, that idea of like, the surveillance, like who is like a target, that kind of thing. And again, we've seen it in things like The Boys. And again, in Star Wars, how did Palpatine rise to, create the society he did? Well, he was like a secret Sith Lord who created a false crisis, that kind of stuff. I'm interested in that because I think that it teaches people about how this is a reality. And I think a lot of people just go, oh, no, that's just something in those stories. That doesn't really happen. So like an example, I think in my mind is like when, you talk to your family. I remember before saying about, my mum or someone was saying like, oh, well, MPs don't have like businesses and like, investments and stuff. I was like, Mum, like the husband of Theresa May literally owns the company which bombed Syria. Like, you can't get more like vested interest and corrupt than that. And that's what I like about when content can reflect that it can show that like, oh wow, these governments and these powers can do that, and we wouldn't have to, like people might say, oh, that's just, like you just, again, conspiracy theorist thing. I'm not saying like, that like kind of far out stuff, like, the whole, pandemic and all that. I'm not, a part of that kind of crap. I'm just saying that when we are in a position in which we have got people who are more interested in about making a profit and making money, which is perfectly, example with this pandemic about, like getting a private company, which again, the government has got links with to make the test and trace system. That's why we make these stories. If we weren't in that position, that the content, the comics and films wouldn't have to tell those stories. But we are in that situation, so they have to. So that's why, like said Alan Moore, in a time in which like the Conservative government was, massively in power that he was making this story about how, you know, governments who like take advantage of the poor can, you know, have a very negative effect on society.
I mean, yeah, the whole thesis for V for Vendetta is that all governments lead to oppression because, V for Vendetta is a great example because that and our history, that was Margaret Thatcher. But if you watch the movie, there's some references to the Bush administration at the time when that movie came out.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what's great is, you know, like that idea of, well, you know, they did it in a film which I mentioned earlier, you know, when they're talking about like Vice, when they're literally just like, is there a way that we can access everyone's information, you know, and that was a thing, you know, so, you know, can we spy on our, you know, citizens? Oh yeah, we'll just say that we're checking that everyone isn't a terrorist, you know, so it's that kind of stuff. And, you know, again, more prevalent than ever, you know, you only have to look at your phone to know that is a thing, you know. Again, I'm not going down the line of like Google's listening to your conversations so they can sell secrets to the government. No, I'm just saying that, like, obviously if you mention the word bike and then a bike advert comes up on your phone, then that is just a thing. I'm not saying that they're selling it to the government or any of that kind of stuff. I'm just saying we're living in an age in which that could potentially become a thing, in which, you know, we need to be careful about the technologies and the people we invest in, because it could go too far. It could become corrupt. Again, I'm not saying that we've ever had anything on the level of some of these comic book stories. I'm not saying that there are helicarriers out there watching people ready to assassinate them.
2020 is as close as we're going to get to like a comic book event, I'm telling you.
But that's what's good about these stories, is that they can sort of tell us, you know, like this is, you know, this could happen, you know, like I said. And that's why obviously nuclear, you know, post-apocalyptic stories are such a big thing, because it's always a warning of like, well, if you have too many battles and too many civil wars, you're gonna blow yourself up. And, you know, it hasn't happened yet, so nobody's there going like, oh, well, that's stupid because we've never nuked ourselves. But no, but the story's there to sort of like warn us of like the dangers if we get too far. That's the idea.
And that's what all these people were trying to say. Frank Miller, Stan Lee, Alan Moore. You know, Alan Moore especially, I think he is like the political comic book writer. In an essence, all his work is heavily political. Yeah, it's so perfect time to watch V for Vendetta, guys.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what's interesting, is that you get these people who, you know, like I said, you know, he is the most political, but there's a reason why he's doing that. And we mentioned before, Chris Evans, you know, somebody you could say like, you know, why is he getting involved in this? He's just an actor. And it's like, he plays Captain America. He believes in like, you know, freedom and that kind of stuff. It's important that he's using his platform for good. So, you know, he set up a platform, a website specifically, you know, to make sure that people are being told the correct information by their politicians, which is called a starting point. So it means that he's trying to make change for good reasons, not because he's not being paid by Biden or something. It's just something he genuinely believes in. But, you know, that's why he's attracted to character. That's why he plays Captain America. And that's why his performance in like Civil War and Winter Soldier comes across so great, because you're like, it embodies a lot of his own personal thoughts, you know, and that's why that performance is, you know, it's fantastic. And I think, again, it goes to show with, you know, most of the superheroes that we see, you know, that they translate into their real lives. You know, Mark Ruffalo is another massive voice in, you know, on Twitter for anti-Trump and that kind of stuff. But, you know, it makes sense, because that's the kind of world that they, you know, the work they're attracted to.
It is with great reluctance that I have agreed to this calling. I love democracy. I love the Republic. The power you give me, I will lay down when this crisis has abated.
We could keep talking about this for hours. It's such a deep, deep conversation that I think it's not over, and it won't be over for a long time. So with that, I mean, I'd like to just say that I don't think politics and the world outside will ever be hidden from these stories. You know, there will always be... Comics, in a way, are self-reflective of the world we live in now. So whatever's happening in the world is going to be in the comics. So it's never going away. You know, anyone could be Spider-Man as well. It could be a black kid. It could be me. It could be you, Dave. It could even be the most racist person on this planet. But that's the point. So, all I want to say is just that try to look at things from a more open mind and read more comics. We're all in this together, man.
I've just got this image now of like a Stormfront type Spider-Man in the Avengers going up to Captain America like, we need to get him out because I don't like him. You're like, oh my God. Wow. I didn't expect that.
So yeah, Dave, do you have any final statements?
I think, yeah, very much the same as you. I think that, like I said, even if, we're there in 30, 40 years' time and we're living in the utopia that we all hope to have, people will always have to be held to account for something because there's always some aspect of something that people are going to miss. So as good as maybe certain politicians or governments are, there's always going to be somebody that's left by the wayside because as much as they might focus on this good thing, then it means funding or something's been taken away from that. So again, hopefully then when more, if we get more liberal governments in the future, they'll be doing all the right things, but that, there might just be that one thorn that they've not looked at and they've gone, what? We have overlooked that. We have, unfortunately, taken away funding, which has had this knock-on effect. And that's why it's important that comics and stories and media continue to tell those stories and continue to represent that. And I hope that we just have, I think we're going in the right direction. I just hope that people don't get too, gatekeepery about certain things and too, so, we shouldn't expect people to be perfect. And, at the same time, it doesn't mean that then like the behavior of Joker is, the film, a lot of people said in reaction to that, didn't they? Said, oh, well, this is glorifying that, this is saying this is the right thing. It's like, well, no, it's just saying how society can push people to get to these extremes. So, like I said, I think we're going in the right direction. I think the comics and films will always be a representation of that. And if they're not, then they'll be a representation of the history and how things can happen again. So even if we are in a perfect world, they could be like, this could just as easily happen again. Look at how, this happened. I said before about Trial of Chicago 7, they're like, this happened before, it's happening again. It's that kind of stuff as well. And I think, again, people are just as much to blame sometimes as governments, if they get a certain way of thinking or it just shapes into something which is originally with good intentions, it might shape into something bad, which can quite often happen, especially with fan bases, because they might be like, no, I don't like this. And then it turns to like, I hate this. And then it turns into like, I want this person to like be left from the franchise forever kind of stuff. It's point the arguments at the right places and do your research. Make sure that it's something that you're arguing for is actually justified. If that person, even if like everyone on Twitter is saying it, oh, well, everyone said it on Twitter. That doesn't mean it's true. That doesn't mean that like, it's just jumping on a bandwagon. It's just people with agendas. They're of a certain publication, or they've got 5,000 followers. Oh, my 5,000 followers will love me saying this. It's that kind of thing. Look into things, research things, see if they're making sense. And if you see people who are saying the wrong things, it's like Facebook and stuff these days. Sometimes they'll come up like, are you sure this is from a valuable source? Like when you're sharing something, it's that kind of thing. If you see somebody saying something that's not true, be like, excuse me, mum, you're not actually right about that. It's that kind of thing. Just, don't be like aggressive about it. Just, we need to teach people about these kind of things. And again, I think that's what's important. In the world in general. It's just, like I said, be nicer, see what happens. But like you said, with, even though it's in America and we're in the UK, we're such a connected, the world's never been smaller because we're so connected. And I think the hate and rhetoric that's over there, it's easily carried over here. And I think that's why it does upset and anger people so much, especially when, like I said, it's not like we've got a government there which is like, yeah, we disagree with what they're doing completely. It's like, we're very much in the same boat. I think I saw somebody today saying, there was an article that said there's no constituency in the UK which would vote for Trump over Biden. And somebody said, but yet they voted for Boris Johnson. It's like, well, yeah, that is true. But Trump is a more extreme version. That's why. But hopefully, it just means in the future that people will.
Well, America's a bit more of an
do
extreme
away with
country.
dictators. Yeah, exactly. Go listen to Charlie Chaplin's speech from The Dictator, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, guys. Don't listen to dictators. Listen to the people.
You are not machines. You are men.
Yeah. Yeah.
So good. All right, so we're going to end the show now, Dave, with some recommendations for the people. So we're going to recommend each a film, one film, one TV show, and one piece of comic book, whether it can be a comic series or a graphic novel that you feel has a big political message and people should check out, or maybe recheck again to have a deeper look at it. So let's start with TV. What are you going to go for, Dave? What's a TV show that you think people should check out? I mean, for me, it's easy. It's Watchmen. Watchmen, the TV show. It's on, for people in the UK, it's on Now TV right now. America, you've obviously got HBO. But it's stellar. It's one of the best TV shows I've ever watched in my entire life, honestly. I can't praise it enough. I'm so precious about the Watchmen world, and I was dubious going into it, but it just, destroyed my expectations and soared to heights I couldn't even believe with. And the political, social messages behind it is so powerful and really, in a way, represents what America's going through today. So I really, really suggest people watch that if they haven't already. It's so good. If you read the original book, it helps, definitely does help, but it's strong enough on its own that you don't necessarily need the original source material.
Yeah. In TV, actually, I would say it'd be easy probably to go for something like The Boys. So I think we've talked about The Boys enough in the past, and like I said, I hope people would have just seen it anyway, and it's not like that much of a hot take. So I'm actually going to go for both Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra. I think those are fantastic examples of where we've been talking about representation and different cultures. So if you want to get a series that like teaches you about like, hey, it's just a normal thing to have like different cultures and, learning about different ways and the negative sides of having like big oppressive regimes, and standing up to them, then that's a perfect example. And as it goes along, it teaches you a lot about like, being kind to people, not, bowing down to crazy ideologies and going too far into things. It's like, it's that balance. And, that's what they say. It's, the balance of the spirits and all that kind of stuff. So my recommendation would be the Avatar universe, or whatever you want to call it, which is available it's on Netflix. So.
Yeah, it's a good selection. I haven't dived into the Korra stuff yet. But the Last Bend...
Very much recommend.
Yeah, I've heard some really good things, but the Avatar Last Bend stuff is so good. So good.
Yeah. If not just for J.K. Simmons as an animated character, you can't go wrong.
Right, so what are we going to do next? All right, how about some reading material then? What you got, Dave?
I don't know. I would probably say go back to the original V for Vendetta so you can compare, like you said, learn from the past, have a look at the messages that were trying to be made then, because there's a lot of stuff, like said, about like, America's nuked itself and all that kind of, like the disease, and you're talking about, the effects of a conservative government, that kind of stuff. And you can see how it translates today. And then if you compare it to the film, like you said, you can see how they translated it to like more mirror at that time what was happening in the world. And the importance of making a movement, of a social movement, of people like, turning on something and saying, no, we as a people are going to stand up and stand against this, and having a symbol there which represents that. So I think my pick would be V for Vendetta, because, like I said, it comes from the expert Alan Moore. You're going to get like a really rich and deep story. And yeah, which is kind of dark and a bit gritty as well.
Yeah, it's so good. I need to revisit that as well. I haven't read it in a while. I think for me, I'm going to go to the 70s run of X-Men by Chris Claremont, when they basically rebooted the X-Men with the sort of characters we know now as the main team, with Storm, Nightcrawler, and stuff like that. Just because of all the stuff going on in those books. Like, it's incredible that the themes of discrimination, LGBTQ representation, civil rights, as I mentioned, it was at the height of the civil rights movement. The fact that Professor X and Magneto are basically white versions of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King in terms of their ideals and ideology and how they approach things. You know, Malcolm X being a much more extremist in terms of violence, like Magneto, and then you also have Professor X being like Martin Luther King, who believed in unity and that we should all work together and stuff like that. So all that juicy stuff is in there. So you can buy them on Amazon or your local comic book stores. Just pop in and ask them and they'll point you in the right direction. But yeah, all the X-Men stuff, starting with Giant Size X-Men #1 and then going to Chris Claremont's full run.
So what would you go for your film?
Film's a tough one because there's a few out there that I would probably choose that I'd be like, you have to watch this film. I think for me, you know, quite relevant to our times now, I'm going to go with Captain America Civil War. Because, you know, in that film, you're given two sides to a coin with huge ethical complexities, you know, layered on them. You know, two-party systems where we don't necessarily agree with either of them on everything, but we're voting for one of them because they're pushing for things we need or want, which is really relevant in today, and especially in, you know, Brexit and all the US and also our elections that we've had the last couple of years. You know, it's really getting to that message that, you know, you have to look at things from both sides, but it's still so difficult to decide because, you know, not necessarily one is right or the other. And I think Civil War did a really good, an escapism way of looking at that sort of ideology, you know what I mean? And it came out, and, you know, it's one of Marvel's better films as well. Like, the drama in that is so good. Like, obviously, people remember it for the big action sequences in, like, the airport and stuff like that. But for me, it's the emotional drama behind, you know, two different parties. And, you know, it also relates to, you know, us, the people, voting. You know, as you mentioned up top, people have been split with friends and families over different political views. And I think you see that here with Tony and Steve. So, yeah, Civil War will be one for me.
If only British households had the same sort of airport battles, that you know, that would have been a lot more entertaining to see. You know, like
what, in little old Cardiff Airport.
You know, yeah, just, you know, mum and dad there like firing lasers. You know, like the daughters there like flipping cars around with their red magic. That'd be cool.
You voted for Trump.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. So while I think that we have X-Men represented by the comics that you were mentioning earlier, I'm actually going to go for Star Wars on my film picks. Possibly more specifically the Phantom Menace, because I think that is the one which you can see the most, the sort of political influence. And as long as you go in with it, like, you know, people might say, oh, well, you know, that is the most political, that's why it's the worst one. But if you go in with it, with the idea of watching it as the Phantom Menace, you know, Palpatine is the Phantom Menace. Watch it in, like, how does he get this power? How is the galaxy in this state of which he can easily do this and create this false crisis? I think you'll be a lot more on board with it rather than going like, oh, I want to see this fun, action-filled Star Wars film, which I still think it is as well. I just think that in that film, you can see the most about, you know, how he gains that power. You can watch the transition from, you know, disrespecting the old chancellor to then, you know, influencing the Queen to call for a new vote, and then he conveniently then is the, you know, one of the next candidates, you know, and he's there as the chancellor by the end. So by the end of that film, when you have, you know, who was killed, you know, the master, the apprentice, and then it goes to, you know, Palpatine, that's such a great end shot because, you know, you literally are just saying at the end of the film, this guy has been responsible for everything in this film. And I think that you've also got a lot of great political commentary in terms of like the Jedi, Coruscant, all of that kind of stuff. You got Qui-Gon Jinn, which is a great character. You were mentioning earlier about Martin Luther King. You know, he's almost, again, that kind of character of like, well, you know, let's do this in a more controlled way. He doesn't agree with the way that the Jedi are doing things, which actually goes back to what we were talking about earlier, wasn't it? Where we were saying about people being too extreme, saying like, oh, you can't do this because you previously said this really bad thing. And, you know, like, we have to have this representation. This person has to play that. And it's the same with the Jedi, you know, saying like, you have to be a certain age to be a Jedi. He's too old. You can't marry anybody. And, you know, all of that comes up later in the franchise and in future series, etc., saying about how they lost their way because, you know, they became too involved in the Senate and all that kind of stuff, which is, again, perfectly shown in this film, in which they say, you know, we'll talk about Anakin later. We now must focus on this political mission that we you know, we're involved in. So yeah, I would say Star Wars. You can include the entire prequel trilogy if you wish, but you know, to me, I think Phantom Menace is the one that shows that how he gains the power, which I think is interesting.
So with that, I think that covers off the show, Dave. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time to talk some more superheroes, but this was a good chat, quite an in-depth one, a lot of stuff to be said, and, you know, as I said as well, this chat is far from over. So if anyone wants to get involved in the chat, please feel free to follow us on Twitter at Capes, Cowls, and Masks. Or if you're not on Twitter, you can also find and like us on Facebook. Dave, where can the people find you, and what are you getting up to?
Yeah, you can catch me on Twitter at David Oscar if you want to see some more of my political rants. You might get this idea that I am just like an angry person from it, but I swear I only just like to come out like that on Twitter. If in person, I just don't bring it up because I don't want to get stressed out about it. But I also put a lot of fun film stuff on there as well. And you can also catch me on Letterboxd at David Oscar. So you can also check there kind of stuff I'm watching, what I'm rating, what I'm reviewing, and yeah, follow me there, and all the stuff I'm up to in terms of, you know, fresh take. We got the Mondaylorians, as we mentioned earlier, as in the first episode we were talking about season 1 of The Mandalorian, and I'll be back talking Star Wars with Jake and Niall from episode 3 onwards, so that's going to be a lot of fun too.
Yeah, I've been having a good time doing that one. Can't wait for the rest of the episodes. So check out Fresh Take, guys, for all the latest and greatest. And also you can follow us, look at all our other episodes on Apple, Anchor, Google, Spotify, basically any place you can get a podcast from. Give us a like, share, follow, spread the word of Capes, Cowls, and Masks to all your friends. But until the next episode, guys, stay safe and take it easy.
Bye.
Democracy.